Welcome and hello. This is a video tutorial on HEC ResSim, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about release rules. This is the first video about release rules, so I'm just going to talk about the basics of adding, deleting, removing, copying, and how rules are used and how they interact with the reservoir and with the zones. The actual details of specific release rules will be in the next few lessons or videos. What I have on the screen here is a network. I am in the reservoir network module. This is a connected network. So what we're seeing here is a reservoir and a couple streams. So we're going to be making our edits to this reservoir here. I click on the pointer tool and right click, edit reservoir properties. And as you can see from the reservoir editor dialog box, I've already uh, made a few edits to this reservoir. I've created the physical properties you're seeing here, the pool, the dam. Then I created one outlet group, which contains one uncontrolled outlet, one controlled outlet, one power plant, and one pump. I didn't rename these elements. I just kept them as they are to helpfully identify them easier. Over in the operations tab, I've also created an operation set and created 4 different zones. We have the flood zone, we have a zone called curve A, we have a zone called curve B, and then the inactive zone. And those two curves have elevation associated with them on a monthly basis. What I'm going to talk about is the rules. So let's just start adding rules and then I'll talk about them. Let's start by assigning a rule to zone curve A. This is a zone that I named curve A. And to add a rule, you can go up to rule and click new. That brings up this rule dialog box for creating a new operating rule. Another way to do it is by right clicking on the zone and then clicking add new rule. Same thing. Next, we have to give the rule a name and then identify the release from element and then the rule type. If we the release from, we'll just say these are the different elements that are part of the reservoir and the dam. So these names right here correspond to what we saw over in the physical tab of reservoir, dam, control, the outlet group, and then uncontrolled outlet, controlled outlet, power plant, and pump. Let me go back, add new rule. So let's go ahead and select controlled outlet. If I select controlled outlet, the rule type depends on the element type that the release rule is applied to. As you can see from this drop down, a controlled outlet allows us to select one of these 4 rule types. But if I'd selected just the reservoir, we have a different list, some of the same items, but ultimately a different list for rule type. And like for pump, the only option is a pump schedule. So just know that the user manual does have a table that identifies which rule types are associated with which elements. All right, I still have to give this a name. I'll call this min downstream controlled outlet. Probably not the best name, but I'm just going to go with that for now. All right. So what happened was in our zone rules tree, we have a new rule here. The zone is this blue line, and then the rule is this purple square. That's just the icon. I can do the same thing by adding another rule. I can call it max downstream controlled outlet. And again, I'm going to say that's coming from the controlled outlet, and this is a release function. Okay. What I actually meant to name this was release function because that's the type of rule. So I'm going to right click, rename, and then I can just type in release function like that. And then okay, it updates. I'm going to do the same thing over here. Rename and paste that. Oops, got the underscores. Okay, great. These 2 rules now apply to zone A. But the other zones, the flood and the curve B zone, still don't have any rules. Inactive doesn't have any rules and never will. It can't. That's just one of the attributes of the inactive zone. If I wanted to add a zone to curve B, no problem. Right click on the zone curve B and add a rule. Another way I can do to add a rule, if I already have the rule data that's assigned and set up for a different zone, I could just copy by using an existing rule, and then I select one of the rules that I've already created and then click OK. And one other option is to click a checkbox down here that says add this rule to all zones. So if I do that and click OK, I now have max downstream release function assigned to the flood zone, the curve A zone, and curve B zone. What you're seeing in the main panel of the reservoir editor when I select a rule is the details of that rule. Those rule details also change based on if we're using a different type of rule, because there's a lot of information in these rules and I just can't cover it all in one video. This video is just more of a high level understanding of the rules themselves. Okay, we can also delete rules by clicking on the rule, or right clicking on the rule and clicking remove, and then click OK. The rule is gone from that zone. I can also remove it from this zone as well. If I want to remove the rule entirely from the reservoir, I would go up to rule and then delete. And as you notice, we still have two rules here. In fact, if I deleted that rule here, remove, okay, and then I wanted to add it again, say use existing rule, I still have two rules. The min rule is the only rule being assigned to any zone, but I still have the max rule here listed. And that's because the rules are not tied down or really connected programmatically to a zone, but rather to a reservoir. The rules are associated with the zones, but that association can be disconnected, which is what we were doing by removing the rule from the zone. But it doesn't actually remove the rule from the reservoir. And that's what's happening here when I select max and then click OK. Okay, I'm sorry, that was adding it. Let me go ahead and do what I thought I was doing. Rule, delete, and then max, and then OK. And it asks me if I'm sure. I say yes, and then it's totally gone. So now if I wanted to add a add an existing rule, the only one I have is the MinDS release. Okay, let me go ahead and add that max back in real quick. Okay, so I added that max downstream release function rule back in to zone curve A. I'm going to remove it here. The rules are evaluated from top down. So the first rule is the highest priority. After that, the next rule down is the next highest priority, and so on, as ResSim evaluates these different rules for each zone. If you want to decrease the priority, you just right click on the rule, click decrease priority. If you have a lot of rules and you want to just send it to the bottom or near the bottom, you can right click and say move to bottom. And then also if you have a rule that's not on the top, you can increase or move to top. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the rules. As far as how the rules work, my basic understanding from reading the user's manual is that the reservoir itself has a minimum release and a maximum release, just based on the physical limitations of the reservoir. When you consider, well, zero is probably the minimum release unless there's leakage, but then the maximum release would basically be the sum of all the outlets based on that particular elevation. Once that minimum and maximum physical limits are determined, the next step is the zone is identified. So in my case, it'd be either the flood zone or curve A zone or B zone. And I mean, if it's inactive, then no water can be released. And then after the zone is identified, say it's the curve A zone, then the release rules are evaluated from top down, from highest priority to lowest priority. And based on those rules, the minimum and maximum decision variables, or the decision of the quantity of release, either stays the same or it gets smaller. So in the case of a minimum release rule, that minimum may increase, or if in the case of a maximum release rule, it may decrease, but it would never get larger. The guide curve release is calculated, and ultimately determines the release based on those rules. So yeah, this is just an overview video about the rules, adding them to a zone, the zone rule tree, deleting them, reordering them to give them different priorities. And yeah, so I hope this was a helpful introduction to reservoir rules.